Why festivals are fundamental in restoring water cycles in Europe. Today a short conversation in a degraded landscape which is in need of a lot of regeneration. The tool, animals, syntropic agroforestry, drones, or a festival. Digging water holding infrastructure in the morning, lectures on regeneration in the afternoon, and lots of dancing in the evening. What's not to like? Today we talk with the lead regenerative designer for this festival. James is a regenerative hydrology consultant and founder of Decent Water Company, where he designs and builds nature-based water systems to help landowners and farmers to become more resilient against flood, fire and drought. As well as the co-founder of Landscope.earth, a platform that makes LiDAR terrain analysis easily accessible to land professionals for design and planning. This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, where we learn more on how to put money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems, while making an appropriate and fair return. Climate action's singular focus on CO2 and CO2 equivalent misses the bigger picture. Intact water cycles cool the land, recycle rainfall and stabilize local temperatures. This episode is part of our ongoing water cycle series, where we focus on how restoring small water cycles is unusually actionable when it comes to climate change. Welcome to a very special episode on the land, not walking this time. We're going to sit between two almond trees and talk about water cycles with James. So welcome first of all on the show.
Thanks
in this improv after a festival, 10 lives. We've regenerated quite some smilands. We'll get into that. But I wanted to quickly pick your brain on water cycles and water cycle restoration, as you so eloquently put it before with Louis. But first of all, what brings you here? What of all the career paths you could have picked, you're working in Portugal and beyond actually on land restoration, water cycles, water as a key resource and a key challenge and a key barrier. How come? How did you end up doing this most of your waking hours and probably some of your non-waking hours as well?
Yeah, sure. So it's a long and winding road, like most people in this space. Coming from diverse careers, I spent a good majority of my early career in the tech space, in sales, which took me around the world to a lot of wonderful places. But I started to get this sort of disillusionment that there's got to be something more fulfilling out there for me that's worthwhile. So I started to explore all of the different typical paths like permaculture, etc. And over the last 7 or 8 years of self-study and workshops, etc., one thing that just kept on lighting up like a big red light to me at the conferences and the talks that I was going to, it was all about soil and carbon and trees, but nobody seemed to be talking about water. And I thought, well, that has to be the start of the conversation. If we don't bring the water, exactly, none of the other stuff works. I started to deep dive into understanding the water cycle, understanding the problems of desertification that's happening, and also from my home country in the UK of flooding and those types of things. So
it's often two parts of the same coin, right? Like it's dryness brings fires, brings floods, and many places now actually, like even in the north of Europe, we talk about the dry season or droughts, etc., which a few years ago would have been non-existent. Right. And we're massive fires now in the Netherlands that we had a lot of trouble putting out, which also is something like forest fires. It's not something that we've had because it was such a dry spring until now. And if you had to explain to a 4-year-old, we have had a few here, or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, let's say, or to someone that has no clue on water cycles. We talk about it very often on the podcast, but I do feel it hasn't really landed yet. No offense to the people that, of course, are super expert on this and are listening. But for all the others, let's say the people in the back of the room, if you are explaining water cycles to an average person in Lisbon, what's your starting point? What's your narrative? What's your story or your metaphor, for example, you use?
So the simplest way of understanding the issues that we have, or the challenges we're facing, as you say, there's two sides of the same coin. We talk about the fire, the flood, the drought cycle, essentially just a self-fulfilling thing. When I explain it to people, it's that we've capped off a lot of our land in our cities. The landscape just cannot absorb that water. And we've spent the last few hundred years, we had some incredibly intelligent engineers in the Victorian period, for example. They had rain, consistent climate, and wet fields. And so they put a lot of energy and effort into draining the landscape as quickly as possible.
And it works really well.
And it works fantastically. And unfortunately, it works too well. So we are The big issue that I explain to people is that we have this bit of an obsession of getting the rain that falls as quickly out to the rivers and the sea as possible. And then we're spending a lot of time and effort later on in the dry period bringing that water back in. I liken it a bit like the sort of madness of taking all your garden clippings down to the dump, only to next spring go down to the garden centre to buy back your compost to put it in your garden.
And it's really in landscapes like this, I heard you say as well, it's like a bathtub with a lot of holes in it. Like the water, even if it rains a lot, which it does here in winter, and we've seen it actually now in spring as well, it doesn't really stay. Like it's the soil's not able, or we've built the drainage systems, etc. But even without it, this landscape is so degraded that it cannot hold it, cannot spread, cannot sink. And if it rains too much, which it does, or very strongly, it takes away all the topsoil as well, which probably has mostly gone anyway.
Yeah.
So here in this landscape where we are, what are the interventions we've been actually physically doing, like the smilands, etc., like the water holding capacity, to start slowing that or intervening on like a small scale? What are things that you have been working with landowners and landholders to do just to slow? And then we will connect it to the bigger water cycle, which I think is such a powerful piece of figuring out actually you can start to intervene also with the amount of water and the intensity that it comes, which also always sounds a bit sci-fi, but I'm very curious to get into. But here, what on this landscape, on this farm, what and why have we been doing the things we've been doing over the last few days?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, as you say, it's using the bathtub analogy. It's if you put a hole in your bathtub, it doesn't matter how much and how long the tap's running, it's only going to fill to that point. You're never going to get the bathtub to fill again. And so our landscapes have become fragmented through human intervention or through erosion and things like that, the bathtub is very leaky. And the more the erosion happens, the lower the water table goes. So then, you're reducing how much water you can then hold. So we don't have a water problem. Certainly not in Europe. We don't have a lack of rainfall. We have a lack of keeping it higher in the landscape. So the interventions we've been doing here and the ones I work with landowners, I'm very much an advocate of decentralized systems.
Huge dams, right?
Massive dams, huge
lots of concrete.
Civil engineering projects, Hoover dams across every river. No, the small interventions, but multiplied across the landscape. So that can be, as we've been doing here at 10 Lives, smilands, which are simply like demi-lunes that are rock lined, so semicircle depressions with a rock lining.
Okay, we have to, it's a semicircle. It looks like a smile from above.
It looks like a smile from
with
above.
With smaller and bigger rocks to hold it in place, catch the water, make sure it infiltrates as much as possible. When it fills up, it doesn't overflow on top, but it overflows on the sides. To the next one.
Next one.
Spread, slow.
Exactly.
Slow down, spread it, sink it.
It's slow it, spread it, sink it. Yep, that's the one. But that's just one intervention. Yeah. It depends, obviously, it's all about the context of your landscape and your soils, and of course, the context of what you're trying to achieve. But there's things like you can use, in this landscape, you've got many rocks, so we can create small rock dams in the gullies, so eventually over time, as sediment and the soils and seeds flow down, they get caught, and then vegetation then kind of acts as that plug in the bathtub to then raise the water level on that area.
Because that's what you're trying to do, infiltrate, that certain springs will reappear, like water will stay in the landscape instead of going to the two rivers that surround us here, basically, as fast as possible and get basically flushed
Exactly,
out.
Especially here in Portugal where, in the summers are very hot, but of course it's climbing further and further north in Europe, the hot summers. The idea is that we want to get that water under the ground, into the soil, into the aquifers, so gaps in the rocks, as quickly as we can.
Basically where it falls. That's where it has to.
Keep it where it falls, flow in, and most importantly, get it out of the sun so that it's not just evaporating away, so it can stay in the landscape longer. And the longer we can keep it in the landscape, the more life can take hold, diversity you have, and then it just continues to build itself there. So small, considered interventions, multiple across the landscape, and then step away.
Because that's what you also mentioned, I remember when we were digging, is the smaller you work, the less risk it is. Because working with water is risky. If you build a big dam or a big intervention, you don't really know. A lot of this is coming down to observation. With smaller ones, the risk of, let's say, going wrong is much lower, which means you can observe and you can repeat and repeat. If you do a big one, the risk of...
Yes.
There can be quite... we've seen damage with flooding and dams breaking. What happens, it's not pretty. And what's special here on this location, I think, is that you have been very deliberate on where to intervene. Like, you've done analysis with friend of the show, Ali, to figure out, you've walked the land with him, calculations, okay, where do we intervene? Why is it so important to, let's say, focus your energy and resources on certain places in a landscape, in a property, compared to, oh, let's start digging here, or this is the easiest, or the most accessible, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Ali and I, end of last summer, we walked the land, and
it must have looked very different than now. In terms
it
of,
was very different.
It's so green and so nice now, but of course that is after winter.
Yeah, very brown and dry. Yeah, we walked the land and tried to understand as best as possible that the climate data is very limited here.
Yeah.
The farm is actually set up weather stations to get more information on it, but we estimate that around about 400 to 400 millimeters of rainfall each year. So fairly low, semi-arid location. But the one thing that we recognize that it had is a lot of atmospheric moisture. So there's 2 rivers that border this land. And in the mornings you have the fog that comes up, the mist that comes up from the valleys. So in the mornings, in certain times of the year, it can be, you wake up and you can feel the humidity in the air.
We felt it now as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was about, okay, that's moisture that's not rainfall, but it's capturable. So,
and it's every day. Yeah.
And it's every day. And again, multiplying effect of capturing that, we can then increase, I mean, I'm not going to quote numbers because I'm going to get them wrong, and then I'm sure I'll get a text from Ali.
What did you say?
Yeah.
But you can capture that with life, right?
You can capture,
like with plants, etc., not with machines in that sense.
Like exactly. So it's using, some people may be familiar with the fog nets in Peru, I think, or Chile. It's a similar effect to that, is creating more surface area that can capture that moisture. And the reason why we're rock lining the smilands is because they have a different thermal mass property. So when that moisture comes up in the morning, the rocks are still a bit warmer, they're colder from the night before. Yeah. And so the moist, warm air and then captures on the rocks and it condenses, and then that can drip through, and it's just capturing it. It might be small millimeter.
Yeah, but still, it's every day, it's passive, you don't have to do anything. Yeah. And so like where we were digging the smilands and putting the rocks has been calculated to figure out, of course, it has to be accessible. We were with 150 people. But also between the 2 rivers where a lot of this fog and a lot of this humidity passes through.
Exactly, yeah. So it's straight up the valley, and so then essentially revegetating the valleys there. Usually typical practice is to start as high as you can. On this landscape, unfortunately, it's a lot of the time you get a few centimeters down and you've hit the granite. So
because everything is washed
away. So we took the decision to focus in the valleys and capture that moisture that's flowing up from there, and then hopefully kickstart that succession. And if we can get vegetation and trees, etc., then that's going to transpire and then lift moisture up.
How does that work? Because that's such an important piece of what the landscape itself, not just the rock capturing the moisture that comes from the river, but actually when you have more life in that area, you're starting to influence also the water column or the air above it. How are you envisioning that works here?
So I'm envisioning that works where once we start to get higher succession plants like bushes and trees, that moisture that we've been able to capture and store in the perched aquifers, then these trees can access it, and they're going to be transpiring and sweating their moisture
as Louise likes to say.
Yeah, exactly. Sweating their moisture into the air.
But you don't lose that. It's part of a cycle.
It's part of the cycle. And of course, that humidity can be absorbed in by other plants, and it helps to bring the overall temperature of that area, which multiple benefits. One of them is you bring the temperature down, then the plant doesn't close its stoma quickly, so it continues to respire and it continues to grow. But yeah, I observed that on last summer walking here. It's very hot, and early on at 10 a.m. in the morning, it's very hot. But just walking between 2 oaks, it was probably a few degrees cooler just being next to them.
You have a longer growing season, literally. Like your trees or your plants don't switch off, let's say at 10 a.m. and maybe get alive again at 5 or 6. 2-3 months in the year, which you lose a lot of potential growth. It does a lot of biodiversity, and there's a lot of biomass and a lot of almonds as we're sitting between.
Exactly.
And last question, because I want to be conscious of your time as well, which usually leads to other questions, but the role of technology here. You made a conscious decision as well to not only work on the land, but also combine it with sort of your previous role in tech, but bringing that here. What made you step into that? And with Landscope, with Mitch, to say, okay, we need technology. There's a lot of discussion on ag tech and how do we actually use technology to complexify or bring more complexity to the land. I don't think complexify is a word. What's your take on the role of technology in doing this kind of work at scale. I mean, technology to
yeah.
dig, but also technology to figure out where to plant what and why, and where not to focus. This is a big farm and a big piece of land, and we only have limited resources. Like, where do you go first?
Sure.
And what do you do there?
Sure,
and why? And how do you use tech and technology to unlock some of that maybe previously was only walking the land and hopefully filling out a lot of calculations and stuff, but now we can do that differently.
Sure. I mean, there's the tools that we have available now are incredible. Nothing takes away from actually being on the land and witnessing it and observing it with your eyes, but there's only so much time that we have, and as you say, resources. This site is several hours from my home, so there's only so much time I can come up
Which
here.
still is pretty close for many consultants or people involved in places like you might have them passing by twice a year or something, which is so difficult.
Exactly. So using technology, in particular with landscape, using the LiDAR data that governments have been producing over the last few years and making it more available to the public, which is fantastic, just allows you to be able to read a landscape from your laptop, at least starting points to say, okay, understanding the way the land faces in terms of your aspect and how steep with your slopes, and understanding, right, I can see from these models where the water is going to be flowing, where it's likely to be pooling and collecting. And so it just helps to speed up the efficiency of going, right, I'm going to go and have a look at those particular places in my design. And with this 70 hectares, I wouldn't have had the time to just do the manual going through the map and looking for spaces. And so using this data, I was able to basically run models that looked for all of the most appropriate places to put check dams and to put the smilands on a 70 hectare
And then you
scale.
go and check, of course, you validate, etc. But otherwise you have to be here when it rains, probably, because you have to see and see 70 hectares when it rains is not an easy feat. I think people underestimate how little we know of the land, actually. You're saying, like, even we don't know the rain data in many places. We don't really know. I mean, it's been changing even. Just to understand, okay, where do we intervene first? I think that's going to be such a big question over the next decade because, we have a lot of land to do and limited resources, even if we have a lot of money. And so how do you see that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say to that, we've literally just had a customer message to say, I've owned my property for the last 5 years. I wasn't expecting too much to find out that I've walked it. I'm pretty deeply knowledgeable about my land, but using the tools available, so using Landscape, he said I was able to uncover things and learn things about my land that I never, in 5 years of walking it intensely, I knew nothing about. So I could make interventions based on that information.
And do you see that, and that's my last question, accelerating now with AI and computing power? Is there an inflection point, if we like to say, on, let's say, reading the land from your laptop, of course still walking it, but are we in a moment of great excitement around that?
I think so. I think it is the technologies that are coming out, so especially AI, and if used in the right direction, it just helps to amplify and accelerate. For me personally, I would love it if it just became so normal that you plan your designs and infrastructure or whatever based on how the land wants to be naturally and working with it, and then around those boundaries, rather than the kind of current, just impose it and then deal with the energy and everything else costs.
And the damage when the land revolts. And does it allow us to do this at scale as well, to really start saying, okay, in this area, not just, I think I see vultures going up there. You can't see it, I'm sorry, audience. But just imagine. On a landscape level, really start attracting rain and really start to say, okay, if we intervene at this scale, I know Ali has done a lot of calculations around it. What do we need? It sounds science fiction again, but to really, okay, if we do this amount of plots, we have a good chance of capturing more or bringing in more and pulling more from the ocean or from the sea bodies. And does technology allow us to say, okay, these are the 15 places of whatever size or the 20 places, and this is more or less the cost, and this is more or less the interventions we need to do, or more or less the amount of festivals we need to run. Do you see we're going there?
Yeah. As I say, it helps to it speeds up the process a lot and scales it. You don't have to walk every hectare to understand a place. And as you say, you can then start to do the calculations on what needs to be done, the cost of it, but also the massively important thing in this space that's needed is to be able to quantify the economic benefit of doing it. So if we can calculate how much water we can bring back into this landscape, there's not too much of a mental exercise to start to understand, okay, well, that's going to increase productivity on the site. We're sitting on a syntropic farm here. So you can
Not
then
these
start to-
lines, people. Don't start
No,
emailing, please.
no, not these ones.
They're nearby.
But yeah, I mean, but even on a conventional,
Yeah.
no,
Oh,
conventional
you can calculate
orchard,
almonds need water. You can calculate olives.
yeah.
You can calculate whatever you can do in the middle. You can graze because you have brought water back to a system and kept it in the system.
Absolutely, and you can calculate how much you're going to save. If you don't have an expensive water bill to have to pay, that's money in your pocket.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Thank you so much
thank you very
for
much.
doing a small, not so small water one-on-one. And thank you for listening and watching, and of course, for everyone making this possible and filming.
Cheers.
Just a short outro for the episode with James, which of course was an interesting one, on location, filmed, and you could see some of the background. But I really want to hone on this point, and I hope it became clear in the conversation as well, and it's something we'll be talking about over and over again. When we're doing regeneration, it really matters where in a landscape. There's so much. There are very few places in the world that don't need to be regenerated or don't want to be regenerated anyway. So the choice is where we do things and how we concentrate our resources, which could be money and sunlight and water, to kickstart regeneration in a sort of domino effect. Where to start in a landscape. And I'm fascinated about that. That's why we had a conversation with Ali bin Shahid and this one with James, and we'll have many more to understand, okay, where do we go first? So I'm very curious if this triggers something in you, if you see that same, like so excited to be able to do regeneration at landscape scale in a festival as well. And then that the festival and the organizers take the time to figure out, okay, where do we start first? What are the hills that makes most sense in this case between two rivers that capture most moisture, that can kickstart regeneration of a system, where we have more moisture, can be more mature ecosystem, more mature plants, less the super early ones. And slowly, maybe that landscape can hold more things. And maybe animals at some point, etc., etc. Maybe different trees. I'm looking at a syntropic agroforestry system while I'm recording this. I'm in that mood of succession. I'm very curious if that triggered that with you as well. And as always, share these episodes with people that you think could benefit from it, because our guests deserve it. And get in touch if you have any feedback, ideas, people we should interview. We read all comments. There are many. And we read all emails that come in through the website. There are many. But we definitely get back to you at some point. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and catch you at the next one. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. For show notes and links discussed, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend? And get in touch with us on social media, our website, or via the Spotify app, and tell us what you liked most. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your podcast player. That really, really helps us. Thanks again, and see you next time.